what do you think amateurs are doing wrong?
The problem is that the health and fitness business is full of bullshitters. You know what I mean? And that is a problem with it. There's very, very few people that understand food and nutrition from an athlete's perspective and from a cooking perspective. So you can eat really well. Now that's more than you'd eat in a main meal. Eating well would be the best cyclists I know, quite honestly, are quite nasty bastards. You know, I can think of a couple of people I know that have just got that absolute, that I don't have a relationship with any of my children that I'd like to. But I probably wasn't that nice a person because of that behaviour.
Was it everything you imagined? Was the sacrifice along the way worth it?
At the time.
Alan, welcome to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Glad we managed to get together.
Yeah, it's nice to talk all things cycling, all things food. I'm actually trying to cut a little bit of weight at the moment because I have a race coming up in 3 weeks and I've been on the piss for 4 years. So it's a bad time to talk about food for me. So I'm back. I haven't really been racing much. I've been racing the odd local crit and club league race and stuff, but I kind of officially hung up the wheels. But I'm back this year. Really, Gravels pulled me out of semi-retirement, but I'm going to do the Ross in a few weeks' time. So I was like, you know what? I need to cut a few kilograms for that. So yeah, there's not much fun to be had cutting kilograms.
No, there's not. And you need to be a bit careful with gravel because it's becoming the graveyard of World Tour. You know, you actually look at it about all these World Tour riders that think, I'll just grow a beard and drink beer and go and do gravel. And then you look at the guys at the sharp end of gravel, the actual professionals. And I think there was a race recently, I can't remember which one it was, and you've got Chris Blevins and you've got Keegan out the front, and you've got people like ex-World Tour riders finishing half an hour behind them. So I think there's...
Well, Valverde's announced he's coming back now.
But Valverde won a race at the weekend. He won a race, and I think Calm Mason was third. So you've got Calm Mason. Valverde's old enough to be Calm Mason's dad. Do you know what I mean? You've got the pair of them racing. So no, you be careful throwing your hat in the gravel ring. You could end up hurting a lot.
Humbled. Valverde, to be fair, probably would have won Liège if he had been there at the weekend. So it's not that much of a slight.
No, he's a bit of a special one. But I think, the cutting weight stuff, getting onto the food, it's hard. And, however anybody dresses it up, you've just got to start counting stuff. It's about counting metrics, which is it's really, really difficult. You've just got to weigh and measure, because otherwise it's best guess.
Have you, we've seen this change in focus, especially at the top levels of sport, cycling, but widerly across the athletics area as well. We've seen this prioritizing of nutrition in sport in recent years. Has it surprised you how long this has taken to happen? I'm talking about the dedicated chefs we see now at Jumbo Visma, etc.
Yeah, the penny dropped fairly recently, because you would have the French chefs would always have bread, and the Spanish and Italians would have pasta and rice, and it was very, very traditional. And if you said to an athlete, even 5 years ago, how many grams of carbohydrate are you taking in per hour? There'd be probably a handful. You'd be going back to Froome's Giro antics a few years ago before you actually knew of what, say, 80, 90 grams of carbs per hour looked like. Whereas now, I certainly know this from experience and people that I know that are riding, pro athletes will be taking on 90 to 110, 120 grams of carbs per hour. They'll be on a low residue diet, essentially, which is low fiber, a lot of the time whilst they're racing. And they're seeing, everybody now is doing everything professionally. They're all sleeping, they're all doing altitude, they're all measuring their metrics, and food is just a huge part of that. So yeah, it's taken a while, because you and I know this, Anthony, cycling's a really weird sport because it's very traditional. We still celebrate all the monuments, which are hundreds of years old, but then we're all there on spaceship technology. It's a really strange sport how it works. And I think with food, it's almost been pasta and almost carb loading, whereas now it's almost the other way, that it's become fuel. And the enjoyment element of it is almost secondary. They've just got to take in carbs, and it almost doesn't matter what it is. But it's there's huge gains to be had. And again, there's not a race. If you look at, say, what Velon are doing, they're looking at watts per kilo. How many watts per kilo are they doing? What are they climbing at? And all of that is down to weight management, and weight management is down to your food intake. So yeah, it's taken a while, but it's very much to the forefront of a lot of teams now, I would say.
So what do you think amateurs are doing wrong? Like if you look at your typical club spin, like I don't want to profile the typical rider because there's no typical rider,
No,
but if you look at a club spin, a good few people, a large percentage of that club spin will be overweight, will be above their body mass index recommendation. And even those average club spin riders, they're typically exercising 6 hours plus per week. But if you took 6 hours plus per week in any other sport, like somebody who goes to the gym 6 hours plus per week, their physique is normally a lot more dialed. But in cycling, it's like there's a missing piece for them. Is that missing piece nutrition? Is it fueling on the bike? Or what's your thoughts on it?
that's a really good question. I think the mistake a lot of athletes, a lot of cyclists make is they under fuel training. So, they go out and they'll do 3 hours and they'll be very proud that they've had a bottle or a banana in the back pocket. And then what happens is they have a calorie deficit that could be 1,800 to 2,000 calories. And then they just eat shit for the rest of the day. So they might say, well, I've run in 3 hours, I can eat what they want. It doesn't work like that. It actually doesn't work, because if you've got a surplus, you've got a surplus and you're going to continue. And the other thing in our sport, you can buy performance. You know what I mean? If you go out on an old steel winter bike with mud guards on, and then suddenly you go out and spend 10 to 15 grand on a super bike, you're going to be going 2-3K an hour faster for shits and giggles. It's completely easy to buy performance. So I think, and the other thing as well is if you cycle a lot, you become very efficient at it. It's hard to lose weight. Like, you rarely see somebody, if you had a runner running 6 to 8 hours a week, they wouldn't be able to keep weight on. If you cycle 6 to 8 hours a week and you're still consuming 4 to 5,000 calories a day, you can be a bloater, but you can then go and lose 2 kilos off your bike quite easily by spending money on it. So it's a funny one, but I think if you don't look at the demands of the ride, and again, if you look at your typical club ride, you've got a group going out and they're all going to be riding at different levels. So let's be honest, you could go out with me, we could go out with 10 guys from the local cycling club. You could be doing a level 2 ride. I could be level 3, and the guy next to us could be actually at threshold as soon as he hits it. So it's really difficult with the club culture, because nobody is actually training at the correct zone ever. They never are, because you're either over or under. And theoretically, it would be a bit like if you had two cars driving down the road. If you had, say, a Fiat 500 and a Ferrari 430 Spider, if they're both driving at 50 miles an hour, they're both using different amounts of fuel, and they're both using the engines differently. So I think it's under fueling training, and it's overeating afterwards, I think, is probably the best way of putting it. And you're better to say, look, and the way, again, another way it's really good to explain it, if you and I were to go out at this time of year to ride, you'll lay your kit out and you'll say, right, what is it? It's 10 degrees, right? I'll need arm warmers, might get away with legs, I might have toe covers, I will wear a gilet. You actually get the kit ready for the ride required, right? You wouldn't go out in January in short sleeves and shorts any more than you go out in longs and a winter jersey in June. Why don't you do the same thing with your food? Today is going to be an easy ride. Hour 1 is this, hour 2 is this, hour 3 is this. Then I won't come in and be hoovering the fridge. Alternatively, there's no point in going out and say, well, I'll have 90 grams of carbs per hour. If it's a level 2 ride and you're breathing, your nose breathing, there's no point. So I think that's it. There's no right or wrong answer with it, but I think under fueling training is probably the biggest mistake that athletes make.
So you touched on something really interesting there, efficiency levels. So if you take a rider in his first year and he goes out and does a 2,500 kilojoule ride, but now you fast forward a decade later, after maybe that rider circled through pro cycling and come back out the far side, and he goes out and does a 2,500 kilojoule ride, is there a difference between those two? Are is the Garmin accurately representing
No,
the energy demands 10 years later?
completely not. Like, if you look at the metrics, so you and I have, again, all of us have probably got the metrics. So I use a Whoop band, I've got a Wahoo, I've got Strava, and I've also got, what is it, the app that Wahoo goes to? I can't remember what it is. So and I've got Training Peaks. I could go out and ride. If I looked at the metrics on all of those, they're all different. They're all different. There's maybe 15%, 20% difference in all of them. So I would say what you got to look at is its best guess. So I think and the problem is now is you and I can, we know how many hours we've slept, what our heart rate variability is, the levels of stress. We've got all these metrics, but I think that intuitiveness, actually knowing yourself as an athlete, is something that's missing from people. And because now technology is taking over, every single thing we do, down to blood glucose, sweat levels, can be monitored and measured. So I would say you are going to become more efficient, and you can train your body. Let's be honest. If you're going to go out and ride, let's take an arbitrary number, 32k an hour, 20 mile an hour. As a newbie, that's going to be fairly hard, and you're going to be working much harder. You're going to become less efficient than, say, somebody like Valverde who's been doing it for 25 years. So, and I think you have to take the metrics that you have and just take them with a pinch of salt. I know if I looked at the ways I've got of measuring metrics, every single one of them give me a different number by about 15%.
So you think if you replaced 100% of what you burnt, you're going to end up in a calorie surplus each day?
100% and 100%, you should remain the same. That is the long and the short of it. So I can only take it personally. Now, how old am I? I'm 52, so I'm probably on the older age of people that you would speak to on the sport. I ride my bike 15 hours a week. I'm on I think I'm on week 17 of 15 hours a week, back to back, and I know what works for me. So I can't lose weight by cycling. It's physically impossible. How I do it is by counting calories, and that's what happens for a 50-year-old man because your metabolism slows down. But everybody is an individual with it. So I think that is the problem with it, is that you were all individuals. And if you took 10 athletes that were all, say, 74 kilos, one was 20, one was 50, their metabolism's different, the genetics are different, their efficiency on the bike is different, the training load's different. And again, let's look at things that affect fatigue and energy levels. Sleep, external stresses. You probably, if you looked at it, the least stressful thing I do is cycle, because I don't read my emails, I don't speak to anybody on my phone, I don't have any arsehole winding me up, I don't have a dog's barking, I don't have a vat man on the phone to me. I've got nothing. It's the least. So if I actually looked at Training Peaks, my TSS is only telling me what I've done on my bike. Bike's easy. Like today, my relaxing is going to be going out for 90 minutes on a TT bike. That's the least stressful thing I've got today. I've got builders beside me. I want to kill them. I want to kill the builders. I got a VAT bill that I need to pay. I go away to work next week, so I need to pack. Riding my TT bike, that's actually the least stressful thing I do. And I think that's what people don't. Again, let's paint a perfect picture of it. You're on a training camp. How many people come back from training camps heavier than they go away? Because they've got nothing else to worry about. They're sleeping 8 hours a week, 8 hours a night. They're riding their bike, having a coffee stop. They're out for dinner, out for lunch. They're chatting shit about bike kit all day. It's completely stress-free. Whereas you're at home and you get up, you've had broken sleep, you're on the phone to work, you're reading shitty emails, the kids are kicking off. All those external stresses affect your energy levels. And I think that's the thing that people forget about it, is that if you can do nothing, is look at the external stresses. And I know when we were out in I was out in Mexico with Dowsett doing our record, and it was fascinating. And Hutch, have you interviewed Hutch, Dr. Hutch?
I've had Hutch on the podcast, yeah. I've had Alexander Hutch on the podcast.
Hutch is brilliant. I love Hutch. I got a lot of time for Hutch. He's probably the most clever man I know. And we were
like half man, half calculator.
Oh man, he's a really clever guy. He knows a lot of shit about a lot of shit. And we were looking at the external stresses that Alex was having. And I personally think, and I think Hutch, I'm basing it on gut feel, and Hutch would base it on science, that Alex would have broken Campanet's record if he didn't have to organize the thing himself. Because we saw, he was spammering, he was doing social media, he was trying to do the balance sheet. You then look at Ellen Van Dijk's setup and her infrastructure, you look at Ghana's infrastructure, and Alex, from a stress perspective, never stood a chance, because he had all that external stresses, and going to the velodrome and riding around at 55k an hour was a piece of piss in relation to
that was his rest period.
Exactly. And I think that's the main difference between pros and actual amateurs, is that when you go to a race as an amateur, you're doing your breakfast, you're parking the car, you're pumping up your tires, you're looking at your gear and you're getting your kit, you're worrying about the kids, the wife, the your partner, whatever it is. Whereas quite often professional cyclists just go away and ride their bike. So I think it's a really tricky balance to do, and I think you've got to find out. So I would say what I always suggest when we work, because we work with clients across all boards. So if you came to me and said, "Hi, I'm Anthony. I work in the city, and I ride an hour on my turbo every night, and 2 hours on a Saturday and 3 hours on a Sunday," we would work, and you want to qualify for the Tour of Cambridge Sportif. That we work with people like that, right the way up to people who win Olympic medals. And I think the difference is between is just the external stresses, but also you need to start taking notes. You need to look at how these things affect you, because for some people, the phone ringing or what stress, like I get really wound up about shit all the time. I know for a fact that when I'm away with work, my sleep goes down by about 40%.
So kind of continuing to pull at that nutrition thread and exploring a little bit more of those club riders who are maybe carrying a little bit extra weight. Is there, like, I love that Pareto principle, the idea 80-20, like, is there an easy way for them to optimize their nutrition across the week? Bearing in mind, most listeners here will put them into that bucket of time crunch cyclists where they're looking to balance work, training, family, and maybe some sort of social hobby.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time food becomes an afterthought. So is there like strategies that can make eating well easy across the week for them?
Yeah, I think it's planning. Most of us would know what riding they're going to do a week. So if you think a textbook cyclist, and it doesn't matter whether you're world tour or just want to be the best in your street, you probably do 2 recovery rides, 2 rides that replicate your event pace or event effort, and 2 rides that are maybe over and above that. So recovery, practicing race pace, and then intervals of some description. So if you can then plan your food alongside that, we all kind of know that you might do a cheney on a Tuesday night, you might do intervals on a Thursday, you might do something on a Saturday and do a long ride on a Sunday. That's a traditional week. And do the same thing with your food. Like food doesn't need to be complicated. If you take Bircher Music, for example. So your time poor, 50 grams of oats, 50 grams of Greek yogurt, 100 milliliters of apple juice, 1 grated apple, pinch of cinnamon, handful of raisins. That is a good mixture of quick release and slow release carbohydrate. You throw it in the fridge, maybe some chia seeds, some pumpkin in there if you want to fancy it, pumpkin seeds. That can be made up in less than a minute, and that's got everything you need. Alternatively, if you take, say, 60 grams of oats, as in porridge oats, cook that in 1.5 cups of water or milk, have 120 grams of berries and 20 grams of maple syrup. That's a 400-calorie breakfast. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be overly complicated. And I know those for facts because it's a sort of, I will have that 400-calorie breakfast pretty much 6 days out of 7. And then the one day off a week that I might have pancakes, or I might have, poached eggs with avocado and smoked salmon. And I think that's the difference, is that, you don't need to overcomplicate it. With recipes, for example, you can have something as simple as, and I'm not, this isn't a podcast to promote a book, but if you look at the books that I've done, we've tried to make sure that everything can be bought from Tesco's and cooked in under 30 minutes. So you could make up, say, a Moroccan tagine, which could have some Moroccan spices, which you can buy in Tesco's. You could have a tin of chopped tomatoes, a tin of chickpeas. You could have then peppers and some form of protein. You have that with couscous or rice. You've got a meat that's got protein, it's got carbohydrate, it's got fat, and you've got your vegetables in there to give you all your nutrients. It doesn't need to be too wanky per se, and that's the thing with it. But if you imagine your Monday is your rest day, then by default, maybe increase the amount of protein you're eating, reduce the amount of carbohydrate. If you know on a Tuesday evening you're going to go out and do the chaining and give your head kicked in, have carbs for breakfast, have carbs for lunch, and have a protein and carbohydrate dinner. But it doesn't, you don't have time. A tin of tuna, a chopped up avocado, and a packet of pre-cooked rice is protein, carbs, and fat. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't need to be overcomplicated.
You know what? I think the big separation I see is really early in that conversation, you spelled out one recipe and you're like, that's a 400-calorie breakfast. when I chat to world tour guys, they know exactly. They're like, oh yeah, that's a 500 calorie
Yeah.
meal. That's a 700 calorie meal. They're very in tune with what the intake is. When I look at some of my friends who are trying to be healthy, you know, quote unquote healthy, and I'd say to them, what did you have for breakfast? And they're like, oh, you know, I had some eggs, I have an avocado, I had smoked salmon and some grilled halloumi. And you're like, there's a big
Man,
calorie
as a
hit.
matter, that's probably
Like,
the problem is that the health and fitness business is full of bullshitters. You know what I mean? And that is a problem with it. And there's very, very few people that understand food and nutrition from an athlete's perspective and from a cooking perspective. So you can eat really well. So that's a great example. I want to eat really well. Toasted artisan sourdough with seeds and shit in it, crushed avocado with Sicilian olive oil, organic smoked salmon and poached eggs, you know, from chickens that have been fed gold dust. Man, that's beautiful. Man, that is probably 1,000 calories, maybe 1,200 calories. That's not eating well. That's more than you'd eat in a main meal. Eating well would be, I've got intervals to do today. Man, you could have a bagel with nut butter and jam. That's perfect for intervals. You could have risotto rice cooked in coconut milk with white sugar. That's brilliant for intervals. That isn't great. That's eating a nutritional, woke, trendy meal that would look good on Instagram. It's perhaps not the best thing for your training. And that is exactly it. So if you think, you know, World Tour riders, you'll say they will know where the calories are. They will know. It's a bit like, do you know what 5 watts per kilo looks like? Do you know what it feels like? Do you know what 6 feels like? They have that ability to do that. And I think if you can do nothing else by yourself, a small set of kitchen scales and go 60 grams of oats. What's 60 grams of oats? Do they know what that looks like? And or the difference between 20 grams of maple syrup and 30 grams is that. That's it. But the difference between being in a calorie deficit, equal, or surplus is that. It's a bit like, again, you could make porridge up. You could do 60 grams of oats, 120 grams of berries, and 20 grams of maple. I know this because that was my default breakfast for 2 months. So I know I could do it blindfold. The difference between that being 80 grams of oats with chia and flax seeds, full fat milk, you then have a banana and berries, and you put 40 grams of maple, is probably double the amount of calories. Doesn't taste any,
yeah, it's wild.
it's wild. So if you were one of those people that can't keep weight on, those, I think they're called annoying bastards. I think that's what they're called. You know what they're called. Those annoying people that I can't keep weight on. Oh, bless you.
I used to be one of them.
Exactly. Those gits that we occasionally know. You know, so if you then get calorifically dense food. So good foods, nut butter, you know, avocado, oily fish. Those are really calorifically dense. Full fat milk, cheese. All of those things are things you avoid like the plague if you want to actually have, you know, if you want to have weight management, and say, unless you're one of those rare beasts. So I think that's something that's really, really important. But you don't need 10 breakfasts, you don't need 10 lunches. You just need the ability to be able to match your training load to your food load. And that's something, again, is really important, is if you're under fueling or over fueling or overeating, using your avocado smoked salmon, you know, example of it, that's good food. That's good food for possibly after a 4 or 5 hour ride, where you need to get nutritionally dense, calorifically dense food in. It's not something that's a breakfast. You know, it's not. And I think, you know, it's a matter of, if you looked at, you've been about enough to, if you actually went and looked at what people were eating in world tours or world tour races, stage races, or even 1 day races, quite often it's low in fiber because your body can store a lot of water and you can have a couple of kilos of undigested fiber, and it's high in carbohydrate. And I know we talked about this before. A male world tour rider will take on at least 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per day on a stage race. Female athletes are taking on 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per day. Now, that's a number that will mean nothing to anybody unless you weigh it out. And if you put it in context, a banana is 20 grams of carbs approximately. Do the math. And that's them doing a stage race. That's the kind of numbers that they're used to taking. You don't need that if you're doing an hour on Zwift or an hour's Cheney. You don't need to be feeling like a world tour rider. And I think that's the thing you've got to be aware of. It's just different.
Shifting gears slightly, I'm fascinated by, and something I really try and explore on the podcast all the time, it's the link between high performers. So I've had a chance to talk to people who've won, the highest accolades in academia, artists who have the highest accolades, sporting people. You've achieved the highest accolades in the culinary world. But I'm interested in that journey. Like, I had Michael Barry, former Team Sky US Postal, on the podcast recently, and one of Michael's books is called Le Métier. And this was a term I heard over and over when I was coming up in France. And the kind of direct translation to English, it's the hard work, the sacrifice, the discipline, or the apprenticeship, for want of a better word, of making your way through cycling. Is that very much the same in the culinary world, that you're coming in from quite humble beginnings and you're learning that trade as you go?
Very, very much so. And I've been fortunate that I've worked in a couple of very different high performing environments, and that the traits are almost identical. If you look, anybody that aspires to excellence requires obsessive tendencies. Like, nobody becomes excellent. And I mean, truly excellent. If you measure excellence by Michelin Stars or world or Olympic medals, we're talking excellence. It requires application, it requires obsessiveness, but I don't see it as sacrifice, because I think it's about investment. It's about a personal investment. And there's a very good coach here, a guy called Jamie Turner, who coached 2016 Olympic champion Gwen Jorgensen, and he talks about investment. It's not a sacrifice, it's an investment you're making in yourself. Because if you spend the time, and I think it's all about how much investment are you willing to make. And if you look at different levels of, say, cooking or cycling, or any sport that you want, you could be a pub chef and you could probably work 35 hours a week, and you could cook stuff in the local pub. That's cool. And you can probably go home. You can spend weekends with your family. You can be there for every birthday, every anniversary. You can see friends, and you can have a life. That's the amount of investment you made in the trade-off. When you're working Michelin star restaurants, I did, 16, 20 years. I was in Michelin star for over 25 years. I think I was over 10 years I didn't take a weekend off. I never did birthdays or anniversaries. I never went to the schools. I never did any of that, because that was not what I did. And, if somebody was having, and you need that laser line focus. And is it selfishness or is it dedication? It's a bit like, what's the difference between arrogance and confidence? It's all about the delivery of it. So the traits that you come across in high performers, in my experience, are very, very similar. And, if you look at truly world class, multiple Olympians, most of them are not the most balanced and nice people to be around. It's a bit like, I could probably count on one hand. I was with British Cycling for about 3 years, and we used to look after the podium squad athletes. So basically, people who are going to win worlds and Olympics, that's where the funding was, and that's where investment was. I could probably count on one hand the amount of those athletes that would be in contact with you when you couldn't offer them anything. Do you know what I mean? When you weren't the here and there, and you couldn't help them become better athletes. So if you're not an event, would they get in contact with you? Would they comment on a post on social media? Would they check in? They wouldn't, because it's not going to help them become a better athlete. It's a bit like if I was running a restaurant and the phone went at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, I wouldn't answer it, because that's not going to help get that 2 duck to table 7. Do you know what I mean? So it's that absolute. We used to refer. You live in this world, this parallel universe, that nothing exists outside excellence. Now, I would say that in some respects, cooking is much harder than sport, because sport is all about winning. If you say to a lot of athletes what they want to do, I want to be world champion, I want to be Olympian champion, I want to be national champion, European, whatever it may be, it's a very, very clearly defined goal. Whereas food's quite subjective, and the best food in the world could be a bacon sandwich in bed. You know what I mean? It could be a kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning down some dirty alleyway. That can be amazing. You know what I mean? It could be a bit of fish on the beach somewhere. It's all up, quite often it's environmental, or it could be a 20-course tasting menu in Ducasse in Monte Carlo. It's very, where sport's easier to compartmentalize. And I think once you identify as a high performer, what does success look like for you? So for me, it was having a Michelin star, it was retaining a Michelin star, and it was constantly, we used to look, our mantra, our kind of raison d'etre used to be, we used to want to exceed our guests' expectations, leaving them wanting to return, which is a bit of a wanky mouthful, but we wanted to exceed expectations. Whereas you'll have athletes, maybe like yourself, what do you want to do? I want to ride for my national team. That's success for you. Or for some people, I know at BC, man, a silver medal or a bronze medal was the end of the world. I remember being in Europeans, or where were we? Appledorn. It was a year out from the first Olympics that didn't happen in Tokyo. And I remember Ed Clancy was going nuts because they'd come fourth. For most people, fourth in Europeans would have been brilliant. And then you got somebody like Jason Kenny who just didn't give a shit because it wasn't Olympics. And success for him, he didn't care whether he qualified for finals because for him it was all about the Olympics. So it's the traits and the behaviors of goal setting, surrounding yourself with the right people to help you deliver your goal, investment, selfishness, stroke, dedication are very, very, very similar. I would say with food, it's exactly the same as sport. When you can no longer be excellent, get out. Don't be one of these people that are, a shithouse 40-year-old professional. It'd be like me. I got out of the restaurant game because I no longer wanted to be the first person in every day. I no longer would pull back something. I could see that I no longer cared enough. And it's almost been the behavior. I almost softened to compromise. Do you know what I mean? And I think for me, I
Yeah.
didn't have that absolute, like, fuck it, it's wrong, throw at the wall, we do it again. I lost that laser line focus. I lost the, it'd be like a pro saying, I've got 6 hours to do, it's pissing down my rain. I tell you what, I'll just do 3 on the turbo. When you do that, you are no longer being the best professional that you can be, in my opinion. That's and I think the traits are similar. The people that I come across are normally coming with baggage as well. They've normally got something. And again, you've probably listened to enough podcasts and you're well read enough to, if you ever look at a lot of high performers, they quite often have some form of trauma or something in the background that's made them want to almost overachieve. And you see that a lot. But nice, genuinely nice, well balanced people that are truly world class are rare to come across.
So when I look at my journey with cycling, or I look at my journey in a previous life before I started cycling, I went through law school, and so I've loads of friends who've gone that path. When I look at it, I don't have any regrets about jumping off and not pursuing the top rung of the ladder. Like at some point for me, when I was riding for a US team, the sacrifices were just too much for me to make sense of them. I was missing friends' weddings. I was missing my sister graduating from college. I was missing my parents' wedding anniversary. And I was just like, fuck this. I don't want that. The sacrifices are too great for me to step up to the next level. And also there's a very uncertain outcome. You could make all those sacrifices and you still don't step up
Yeah.
to the next level. So as someone who made those sacrifices, stepped up, made more sacrifices, stepped up, when you got to the very top of the mountain in your chosen profession, was it everything you imagined? Was the sacrifice along the way worth it?
At the time, yes, and I wouldn't have changed it. Retrospectively, no. Retrospectively, I don't have a relationship with any of my children that I'd like to, because of that behavior. At the time, yes, because the ends justified the means. But I probably wasn't that nice a person when I was doing it. Maybe you're too nice, Anthony. Maybe that's the problem. Because again,
You're the first person
no,
ever
no,
say
no,
that.
it's true. Let's be honest. So let's be honest. If you're going to do law school, right? Nobody chooses law because it's easy. You're obviously clever and you're well educated to do law. And I'm not blowing smoke up your arse here. You know what I mean? Most lawyers are probably well educated and fairly well balanced and being well schooled. The chances are you didn't leave school at 15 if you went to law school. You know what I mean? You've been through the
Yeah.
system, so you've probably conformed, you've respected authority, you've applied yourself, and you've looked at boundaries, because you don't become a lawyer by accident, right? It's not like, I just fell into being a lawyer, as a drug addict and I just become a lawyer. It doesn't work like that. So I think maybe you were maybe a bit too nice and maybe just lacked that killer instinct. But I know professional cyclists that are too nice. The best cyclists I know, quite honestly, are quite nasty bastards. and I mean that in the
Is
nicest.
it nasty, or is it nasty, or is it just blinkered? You know, when for me,
Well,
I had
they,
too many hats,
they,
I had too many
they've
dimensions, too
got
many things I
they've got
valued.
that laser line focus. They've got that laser line focus, and I can think of a couple of people I know that have just got that absolute that focus, that linear focus. So I think it's a really difficult one because if you think you've been a professional cyclist, you've gone to law school, that's not pissing about. Most people will never be a lawyer or a doctor or a professional cyclist or a Michelin star chef. But the difference between being excellent and truly world class is quite often it's just that ability to just go that extra mile. And it could be nasty, it could be, I don't know what it is, but there's almost an edge to them. It's a bit like let's say well documented ones, you know, an angry Cav, an angry Wiggins. You look at those guys. I don't imagine they were very nice to be around when they were at their very, very peak. There's the odd anomaly, like a nasty Jason Kenny. That doesn't exist. He's not, but your Jason Kennys and Chris Hoys of this world are probably outliers. The other one as well I can think of immediately is Jan Frodeno. Jan Frodeno is a very, very nice man. He's a great guy, but he's got that. He can put the blinkers up when he needs to, when he races. But I think it's a really difficult one because I think I know that at the time, the decisions I made, I believe were 100% correct. Retrospectively, would I have changed anything? No, I wouldn't because I was acting on what I had at the time. But I know it. I know there's collateral damage. And if you look at a lot of high performers, there's a trail of devastation behind them, personal devastation quite often because, the difference between training on that day or missing that because of an event is quite significant. And I personally think it's quite difficult to be the very best and also be a truly balanced human being. And maybe I don't have the skills to do that.